directly recognizing the truth of what is the essence of satsang. So it is not a means to find something sometime later. It is not a means to learn a new practice or a new technique or anything like that, but it is actually in the most direct way, the most straightforward way is the direct recognition here and now. Because time is only for chronological matters. We need time for engaging in various activities, planning, and so on. But when it comes to the nature of what is, it doesn't change with time. There is the false build-up of a psyche, which is also called an ego or a false individual self, which is the illusion of a subject sitting inside the body as a separate self. And this separate self is what builds up what's called psychological time. And through psychological time, it imagines that it can be free one day, or it can be happy one day. And so various ways of happiness is being chased by this psychological self in the world of experiences, in the world of so many things. If I travel to this place, I'll be happy, or if I do this particular activity, I'll be happy. So many ways in which in the world of time and space, that's why people have these so-called bucket lists and so all that, because they think I have to do this to be happy, do that to be happy. And then when those kinds of seeking experiences for pleasure or for happiness or for peace are found to be temporary, then the same psychological self wants something called enlightenment or moksha or whatever, nirvana, whatever term it uses. And then there is a lot of knowledge that one can acquire to chase this particular ultimate experience. And again, it's a postponement, because it's only saying that I am this subject and I am not content today or peaceful today, and I am going to become enlightened, or I am going to become liberated, and thereby there is peace and happiness. So this way of seeking something continues now in the most subtle form, and in fact it's therefore also very dangerous in its own way, because it feels very right and pious, and yet it is a very strong bondage of being caught in this false identification as me. It is the false identity as the subject, as the self, as the ego, that is wanting to attain something called liberation. And even if it is conceiving of liberation as a state of no ego, as a state of no individual self, even if that is clear, that becomes a goal. And when that becomes a goal, then the very state of no ego becomes a goal for the ego. and thereby the ego perpetuates itself, chasing the state of no ego. And that's why it's the most subtle way in which the ego perpetuates itself. It says, I have to engage in whatever practices and make everything into a method that can deliver over time. And that time never arrives, because when the time arrives, it's still the same individual self that is there. It is like chasing one's shadow, which is impossible. The ego, which is a knot, this knot only becomes more and more entangled in trying to free itself. So, the very attempt to annihilate the ego perpetuates the ego. That is the conundrum here. And therefore, the direct pointer, the direct recognition is that the very seeker who wants to be free is non existent even now. It is only an imagination. We imagine, we assume, we presume that there is a subject within the body, a self, an ego, which is called with fancy terms such as jiva and or jivatma, whatever term we have. Then we say that that has to realize the supreme self, paramatma, all the rest. But if you look at the direct pointer, even in the texts which are pointing to this, they always point out that the jiva is paramatma right now. It cannot become that, it cannot unite with it or whatever the mind conceives. So all these conceptions that the mind has, that one can become liberated, become one with the universe or with the universal self, that very process of becoming is separation. And therefore, the separation is strengthened, fortified by the very desire to become one. So when we recognize this, and that recognition can happen only now. We cannot create a method to recognize it. We cannot create a practice to recognize it, because all methods, all practices are only for the false ego. So when we listen to this now without any doubts that are coming up from the mind always throws up doubts. That's the nature of the mind. That is why once Ramana Maharshi said, doubt the doubter, because the doubter is the mind, which is the same self, the same false self, which is throwing up questions as to, no, this is not it, there has to be something very great, there has to be whatever one imagines, light shining or sparks flying. We have so many various conceptions, and we compare with a sage and say we are not like him. All of these are coming only because of the same false self. The false self is comparing, is contrasting, is projecting time, is postponing, and thereby it is perpetuating itself. And that's the game it's playing, and it's in reality a non-existent fictitious entity that's playing this game. So all that is required is to look whether it exists even now. If we look for it, it's not there. But if we don't look for it, it simply seems to project. It's like any shadow that when the light comes, the shadow vanishes. But until there is the darkness, the dark side of the light, there is shadow. So shadow seems to play all these games, or like a ghost that plays all the games, but when we really look for the ghost, it's not there. We imagine how, for instance, a particular shape in the dark, sometimes children think it's a ghost, and then they imagine the ghost is doing this and doing that, and then when we look for the ghost, put a light on, there is nothing there. So similarly, this ego is doing all these things because of, just like the child imagining, it's our own imagination. The mind imagines, thought projects all these ideas as the, in the name of the so-called ego, the self, and says this ego has to now go, it has to realize, and all the rest. Whereas if we really look for it, all there is the divine energy that's operating even now. Every expression is the divine energy. When we see, for example, we say, I am seeing, as if there is a subject within the body that is seeing. But in reality, if we look at it, seeing just happens. There is no I seeing, there is only seeing. Just because of the structure of the language, also, we think there is somebody sitting inside the body, separate, who is doing the seeing. But in actuality, seeing happens through the various faculties of the body. So there is the eyes that capture the image, it falls, it goes into the brain, and the brain is able to match what is the image and recognizes it as a book or a table or whatever. This entire process is a spontaneous process, but we say, I am seeing, and that's where the fallacy begins. And it's true with every sense like this. Hearing simply happens. I don't hear, hearing happens. Now, when we use the language, we don't have to get entangled by not using the word I and so on, because it's a natural first person pronoun for the interaction of seeing or hearing or whatever. So when I say I am seeing, all that really means is that there is the process of seeing where there is the object that is being seen, and the seer is the brain and the faculty that is within the brain that is able to match images and see. And that seer is a momentary expansion or expression of energy that makes seeing possible. There is no I other than the seer in the brain who sees. Same with hearing, the process of sound, it just happens spontaneously right now. And same with smelling, tasting, and touching. These are the organs of perception. And then the organs of action is the same way, actually. When we speak, words are coming out through the process of memory and language and the vocal cords functioning. All of this is happening with a tremendous intelligence. But there is no I who is speaking. There is only speaking. This is quite unintuitive for the way the normal language is used, and this is the reason why we get caught up in this idea of I, because we take credit, the words come out, and then we think I spoke it, and this I is built up over this image of what it has done. When the speaking happens, there is no I speaking. If one wants to take ownership of the speaking and separate oneself from speaking, speaking will not even happen. Same with walking. If let's say we are walking, we put one foot after another. If we stop and just try to walk without this spontaneity, we cannot even walk. It just happens when we walk. One foot goes, the next foot goes, it just keeps going. If you start thinking about it, then it gets only complex. And even that thinking is spontaneous again. We don't have any way to think other than the faculty of memory and knowledge and experiences that are all accumulated, which results in thought. And therefore, thought is also spontaneous. There is nothing wrong with thought per se. It is only the second thought, as it were, that is the secondary ownership of thought as mine, or speech as mine, or words or actions as mine, or perceptions as mine, which is the sense me, which is essentially just a thought. It is a secondary thought if you look carefully. When we engage in an action, we are not saying, I am doing this, I am doing this. But after the action, and it's instantaneous though that we don't catch it, instantaneously we think, I am doing this, I am thinking this, and that ownership results in the ego getting built, the image being built. And then we are caught in this image. And the same is what we do to others then. We see someone speaking and we say that he is speaking, as in there is some entity there who is permanent and who is speaking, and we ascribe the words to him, and therefore we get either offended or praised or whatever it might be. So this whole game of the ego that goes back and forth is how we interact. And that's why we actually, when we speak to someone, we are both rooting ourselves in the image as the speaker, and we are rooting the other person in the image as the listener, or this person we have built up in our memory. And so those images interact, and we don't actually listen fully because we are constantly judging based on the image we have of our own self, of the other person's self, and all the rest. All of this is because of this false ownership of both here and with others as a separate subject sitting in the body, as it were, directing actions. There's an imagination that there is somebody sitting in the body, in the brain, and controlling the actions and directing the movements, and therefore that director, that controller is called the individual self. But even now, for instance, neuroscience has shown that this very process of creating an individual self is a fiction. There is no center in the brain that is directing actions. Those who have studied the brain, they have confirmed this, that the brain has no center. It's simply operating, and then this illusion of a center is something that's created by another activity of the brain post the activity by a few milliseconds, but it's still post the activity. And because of this, we think there is free will, we think there is control, and all the rest. All of this illusion comes because of this activity of creating, building up a false sense of self and fortifying it. And that sense of self is strengthened when we say, I have to get liberated. So that is the conundrum, or that is the paradox, is that the very desire to be free of this false self is strengthening it, because we, in the very desire to be liberated, we give it reality that this is a true entity and that has to be somehow annihilated. So we cannot annihilate that which does not exist. And therefore, by trying to annihilate something that does not exist, we only give it more strength. So the direct way is to recognize this truth that it doesn't exist even now, and that can be recognized only now. So that's why when we sit in either silence, or when we are listening, or when we are contemplating, we can recognize this if we listen fully right now, that there is only the divine energy operating. There is nothing else. There is only the energy that is operating, that is making every action possible, and things happen. There are no doer thereof. So seeing happens, speaking happens, every action happens perfectly, and there is no separate doer thereof. Each action is whole in itself, and the memory records the action, and then the knowledge in the memory enables the next action, and therefore the cycle of action, it's no different from how let's say a computer works. The memory is stored in the hard disk, and then the memory in the hard disk is used for the next thread to run, and the next thread runs, and then it does its task, and then it collapses, and then the next thread runs, and each thread, when it runs, it enhances the memory, adds more data, and thereby more and more. So all of this process is happening so perfectly. The best computer is the human brain, and it's able to record experiences, access the memory, execute tasks, all of it. And as long as we let this spontaneously, that's how children are, for example. That's why they are so spontaneous. The children, when the brain is working beautifully, and they don't go around with an ego that says I did this or I did that, but then the ego builds up eventually through conditioning, through culture, through society, and then everybody is caught in this. So to again come back to that being of a child within, with all this experiences, then any task, any work, any activity can happen in that ground of childlike openness, and that can be realized now. And that's the direct pointer of our truth of what is. We don't have to then speculate on the nature of this energy and any of that, because all those speculations are again coming from thought. The limited thought is trying to reach and capture this source and try to thereby feel like it has gotten some hold of it. So there is a beautiful expression in the Upanishads where it says, Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasaha. It says, it is that which the mind goes to capture and comes back empty handed. Speech goes to capture and comes back empty handed. So both mind and speech can never capture it, and yet we want to capture it. Even words like consciousness or awareness are all to be held very lightly because they can build concepts in the head, and then we can say we can get attached to these concepts and so on. The truth is, this is inexpressible. So, even in the Upanishads, it only describes it in negative terms. It says Ananta means it's infinite. Anta means that which has end. Ananta means that which has no end, it's infinite. Achyuta, it says. Achyuta means that which doesn't fall. Chuta means that which falls. Achyuta means that which doesn't fall. So, in this way, so many ways in which Aja, it says, Aja means unborn. So, all the words that are described are negative words because in reality, any positive term cannot be used to capture the truth because it's beyond all conception. So it is not within the grasp of mind, it is not finite, it is not ever coming and going, it is therefore the ever present, infinite, eternal energy that is manifesting in infinite ways, in infinite forms through all of time and space, and time and space itself is a projection of this energy. So, therefore, when we recognize this, then all there is the expression of this energy. There is no separate ego other than the expression of the energy. So we can then engage fully in life. We don't have to go anywhere, we don't have to change our clothes, nothing is necessary. We can engage fully in our day-to-day activities with this presence fully there, because there is nobody separating oneself from the activity. That separation is what results in all kinds of suffering, and that separation is what is also seeking. So all we need to do is simply recognize that the seeker is not a reality but only a fiction. And the seeker is in many forms. Everybody is seeking, not just those who are coming to the spiritual wisdom. That's in fact the last seeking, one can say. Before that, people are seeking in so many other ways, and then this is the last seeking. But this seeking also has to go, and the seeking goes only when the seeker goes. So the seeker, to use a modern term, the seeker has to be cancelled, recognizing that the seeker doesn't exist. The seeker is a false, fictitious idea, and if we recognize this, then what remains is the divine energy, and that energy operates perfectly every moment already. And it's the same energy, in fact, that comes out as the seeker. Even the fictitious ego is an expression of the same energy. So it is not that there is something other, but it is just another expression which is part of the play. And that's why it's called Maya or Leela. And when that false expression or this false fictitious energy is seen through, then the same energy functions in a harmonious way. Otherwise, it's the same energy that's functioning in a chaotic way, and that's also part of the play. So that's why everyone caught in the ego is also part of the same energy, and it can result in all kinds of extremes, from small conflicts all the way to major wars, religious wars, all of these are coming out of this petty ego me. So the same energy expresses through all the chaos through this me, and when the me collapses, when we recognize rather the me is non-existent, or in other words it's false, it's only an imagination in the mind, then the same energy falls into a harmonious way of functioning. So that is the direct pointer, direct recognition of the truth of what is.